So thank you for joining us again. And during this webinar, we are going to discuss one of the most controversial topics surrounding the fashion and beauty industry, which is a really big topic right now. Toxins, greenwashing, ingredient transparency, because as consumers, brand owners, influencers, policy directors, and advocates, we want to be able to know what we are applying to our bodies. And we also want to understand how to better protect ourselves, our brands, and our consumers. So as part of this webinar, we will begin with Dr. Lariah Edwards, who will discuss findings from our Beauty Inside Out campaign. Then we will move along to founder of PoliticallyInFashion, Hillary Jokemans, who will reinforce these findings, describing the regulatory landscape and how to engage with legislation. And we will end with a panel of experts from all aspects of the industry, from scientific experts, attorneys, brand owners, and influencers. And you will be able to engage with questions from the audience. So without further ado, I pass it on to Dr. Lariah Edwards for her presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. Very excited for the discussion. I don't have slides, so I'm just going to talk through the results of our Beauty Inside Out most recent work that came out of WEAC's Beauty Inside Out campaign. So my name is Dr. Lariah Edwards. I'm an environmental health scientist at Columbia University, Mailman School of Public Health. And I've been working with WEAC, collaborating with WEAC for maybe about 2 years with their Beauty Inside Out campaign. And our most recent publication was a collaboration between research at Columbia and WEAC about the adult survey work from the Beauty Inside Out campaign. So really, what are we talking about when we talk about beauty? Beauty is powerful when you can be yourself. And that last phrase is key. Using cosmetics and beauty products to play with your appearance or highlight your features should be about self-expression and joy. And however, many of us on this call know that's not the case, particularly for women of color who are known to use higher number of beauty and cosmetic products than white women. Beauty is less a lighthearted and fun approach to empowerment, but it's more of a stressful and demeaning attempt to fit into these narrowly constructed boxes that have been defined by society. You're deemed as beautiful if you have lighter skin or straighter hair, or if your skin is always perfumed and smelling good. And, when these beauty standards reinforce racialized ideas about who is beautiful, who is seen as a person, who is worthy of that job promotion or, having sex and relationships, the result is just inevitably toxic. So our new study, Environmental Justice, which came out in January, summarizes the adult survey work from WEAC's Beauty Inside Out campaign. And, overwhelmingly, the results were disappointing, but predictable. We surveyed 297 women and them-identifying folks in Northern Manhattan and South Bronx. The 95-question survey asked them a variety of questions that range from, have you used skin lighteners in the past year, or have you used them in your lifetime? We also asked about chemical straighteners. Have you used them in the past year or in your lifetime? And those were the two products that was focused on in WEAC's Beauty Inside Out campaign survey. Overall, the study showed that racialized beauty norms motivate the use of skin lighteners and chemical straighteners among individuals surveyed. And these individuals were overwhelmingly people who identified as people of color. So, getting into some of the results, beauty was the #1 reason why respondents reported using these products in the past year, which is, disappointing, but not unsurprising. Half all respondents said they think others believe straight hair or light skin makes women more beautiful. Use of chemical straighteners was the highest among respondents identified as Black, although the data suggests that fewer respondents have used chemical straighteners in the past year compared to those who have used in their lifetimes. So this was one result that I felt was slightly positive, because it suggests that Black women are moving away from using chemical straighteners, which is very much in line with the rise of, and it was the rise of Black women embracing their natural hair. The use of skin lighteners was highest among Asian respondents. Additionally, respondents born in other countries were more likely to use skin lighteners than respondents who were born in the US. And this was particularly true for Asian and Hispanic respondents. And so getting into this idea that I mentioned earlier, that our study suggests that racialized beauty norms motivate the use of these products. What we mean by that is that we found, based on the survey results that we analyzed, for example, that respondents were more likely to use chemical straighteners in their lifetimes if they believed that others thought straight hair makes a woman look wealthier or more professional. So, I'll say that again, respondents were more likely to use chemical straighteners in their lifetimes if they thought others believed that straight hair makes a woman look wealthier or more professional. These are results that kind of spoke to me, because there was a time that I also thought my straight hair was the only thing that would be deemed professional or in work settings. So that was a result that, as I mentioned, was disappointing, but not entirely surprising. For skin lighteners, we found that respondents were more likely to currently use skin lighteners if they believe that others thought light skin makes a woman look more beautiful or youthful. So again, pointing to this idea that these racialized beauty norms that have been around and can be linked to slavery and colonization and sexism, they are motivating these people of color who are residents of Northern Manhattan and the South Bronx to use these particularly toxic products. And that's concerning because, when you think about these products, we know that they contain some of the really toxic chemicals. For example, mercury can cause, which is often found in skin lightening products, can cause skin rashes and nervous system damage. When we think about skin lighteners and the use and using products with mercury in them, if you're using a product with mercury in it, you could also be potentially exposing your kids to that mercury in the products if you are having them apply that, for example, this skin lightening cream to your body, and so then it's on their hands. Or if you're breastfeeding, you then can expose your child to mercury that way. Chemical straighteners can contain a mixture of harmful chemicals that have been linked to numerous health problems. There was just a most recent study that came out last fall that showed that use of chemical straighteners has been linked to uterine cancer. So that was just one more study that has been part of a growing body of literature about chemical straighteners and the health effects that they've been linked to. So, these results, as I said, disappointing but predictable. We saw that the individuals surveyed, predominantly people of color, are frequent users of these skin lighteners and chemical straighteners. So, how do we move forward? How do we educate and, address these concerns? Of course, regulations are a good tool, and we'll hear more about that from other speakers. But I know what we act as an amazing job at is education. So how can we spread the messages about these different factors that may be motivating and putting pressure on people of color to use these products? And I believe while we wait for regulations to catch up, to keep up, to protect us all, because regulations that only are kind of good or half as good aren't protecting all of us. While we're waiting for that, education can be a very strong tool to help us really combat these beauty injustices that we're seeing. And so I think now I'll stop that and take questions.
Well, we'll take questions after our next presenter. And with great transition when you start talking about regulatory. So we have Hillary Jokman, who is the founder of PoliticallyInFashion, a community for fashion designers, manufacturers, artisans, retailers, models, lawyers, reporters, and so many, to learn about legislative and regulatory issues of key importance to the industry. The mission is to educate individuals on public policy and empower them with this knowledge so they can engage with elected representatives on how these issues impact companies and consumers. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Hillary to give her presentation.
Hi, good morning, everyone. How are you? Thank you for having me today. This morning when I was getting dressed and putting on my makeup, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if tomorrow morning when I go to put my makeup on, am I going to be thinking differently about what I'm putting on my body after what we hear today? So I don't know, I may look a little different on tomorrow's Zooms after what I learned this morning. But thank you for the introduction. Like she said, my name is Hillary Jockmans. I am a government affairs consultant by training, but I'm also the founder of PoliticallyInFashion, which, as you said, is a community for all those in the industry, ranging from the designers to the artisans, to the manufacturers, and most importantly, to the consumers, to have an opportunity to learn about these many, many issues that impact the industry. I think sometimes people don't see the nexus between public policy and fashion and beauty and retail, but it's there. It covers so many different areas from IP, immigration, workers' rights, environmental issues, healthcare. I mean, it runs the gamut. Every issue impacts this industry. And we saw that there was a void there for access for people to learn about these issues. So that's what we're trying to do here at PoliticallyInFashion. So I'm very happy to be joining you here this morning. I do have a PowerPoint. Are you going to control that, or can I share my screen?
Yeah, I gave you capabilities to be able to share your screen.
Okay. Well, let's see. I can. Oh, I see what's happening here. You're seeing my whole. Okay, there we go. Okay, great. You would think after 3 years of doing Zooms, I would be a little bit more adept at this. Okay. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about some legislation and regulations that are particularly impactful to the beauty industry and the beauty space. And also then to really think about what it is that you can do as an individual, whether you be a consumer or someone in the industry themselves, how you can engage with folks on these important issues. So 2022 was really a year of unprecedented activity for both fashion and retail and beauty. And we're going to talk about some of those bills that went through. There was action both at the federal level and also in the states. And I'm just going to highlight a few of them here. So the first is a federal bill that passed. The little nickname is MOCRA, the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act. Kind of a dry sounding term, but a very impactful bill. This industry had not had a regulatory overhaul since 1938. That's almost 100 years, 90 years ago. You can imagine how much has changed in that amount of time. And there had been calls for an overhaul for a long time. Bills have been pending in Congress for years, and they just never got any traction, never got over the hump to get enacted. And then lo and behold, at the end of last calendar year, this legislation was slipped into the big omnibus appropriations bill that funded the federal government for the next year. So it didn't maybe get as much attention in the media because there were so many other issues in this bill as well. But it's very important and really something that folks need to be aware of. So just briefly, here are some of the highlights from the bill. Now that this is law, the FDA now has a mandatory recall authority. So basically, when something has an adverse consequence, they have to recall. They have the authority to recall this item. Before, it was just, they could suggest that it be recalled. Well, obviously, that's not sufficient. They're now going to have to label any allergens that are in the product. This is particularly impactful in the fragrance space. Facilities that manufacture cosmetics will have to register with the FDA. And this is a way for them to provide some oversight into production. I think this is an important one to watch because there could be some maybe unintended consequences for some smaller independent beauty brands. A lot of brands get their start in the kitchen and expand and direct to consumer sales. They no longer have to sell at Sephora or a number of large beauty retailers. So now they have to register. Is that going to be a regulatory hurdle that may be too much for smaller brands to overcome? We'll have to see how that plays out. Another part of the bill is you have to report if there's any adverse actions to reactions to the medicine, to the cosmetics. You have to substantiate what's in there. And they're going to look at the PFAS, the forever chemicals. I think there are many who would say we've looked at it enough. We know that it's problematic. We could probably just go ahead and start to ban some of these, but that might have been a bridge too far for Congress. So right now, this is going to require a study of these forever chemicals. Basically, those are chemicals that can just not be processed out of the body, and they hang around forever. And it does, like the speaker said, these are the types of things that can impact your fertility, among other problems. An interesting note from this bill, though, is that professional salon products will now have to disclose ingredients. And I understand that this has been sort of a rather large loophole in the past, that salons did not have to disclose this information. And salons is where a lot of these more dangerous chemicals are being used, things like the hair straighteners. But now they're going to have to disclose this information. So, this will give folks more access to know that these chemicals can be problematic. To me, the smell is sort of a giveaway that there's an issue here, but having to disclose what's in that, I think, will go a long way in the education and understanding for people of what they're putting on their bodies. And so this is, a broad general law. I think some would say that this is a good first step in regulating the industry, but there's a long ways to go. And as someone pointed out to me, there are still no provisions in law that specifically protect BIPOC consumers. And I think that's something that our other speakers will talk about, that some of these products and the chemicals that are in there have been used primarily by women of color, and they are being disproportionately negatively impacted then by these harsh chemicals. So I think that's something to look for going forward. Okay, so that was a bill that was enacted. That one's on the books. We've got a few that are out there pending. One is the Toxic Free Beauty Act. This would prohibit the use of 11 hazardous chemicals, including mercury. This one would ban all the PFAS, forever chemicals. They're really taking a more bold step here. This bill was introduced last Congress. It was not acted on before the end of the session, and so it would have to be reintroduced this year. And to date, it has not been reintroduced yet. Another bill also targets the forever chemicals. This one, the No PFAS in Cosmetics Act, which is, again, straight out ban the use of these intentionally added chemicals. Again, this is one that was introduced previously, but did not get any traction in Congress. So it would have to be reintroduced this session in order for it to be considered. And finally, there's also a bill called the Natural Cosmetic Act. And this is going into the idea of having a rule to define what is natural. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the context of regulations with the green guides. But right now, there is no definition of natural. And this would require the FDA to put out a rule to come up with with that definition. Again, this was a bill that was introduced last Congress. The sponsor lost re-election, so it would have to be reintroduced this session. So that's what's been happening at the federal level. Take a quick look at what's been happening at the state level. New York State this past year passed the mercury in skin lightening cream. And I know this is something WEACT was really engaged in. This would ban the sale of skin lightening products that contain mercury. This was a huge win. It's been signed into law by Governor Hochul. It is now on the books in New York State. They also have a couple of other bills pending in New York. One which would, again, ban the sale of products in New York that have intentionally added harmful chemicals, and also would put civil penalties on manufacturers. And that's a big step as well. This is pending in the legislature in New York. It was just reintroduced, I believe, in February. There has not been any action on the bill. New York has a very short legislative session compared to Congress. They are in session now, but then they will end by around June. So there's really the next couple of months for advocacy in New York State for legislation. New York's not alone in looking at these issues. California, not surprisingly, has been really taking the lead in this space. In 2020, they passed the Toxic Free Cosmetics Act. Maine also has a bill, a law rather, I should say, that would ban PFAS from being intentionally added to products sold there. And Maryland and Colorado have similar laws on the books. So that's what's going on in the legislatures, both at the federal and the state level, just sort of a high level overview there. But I want to take a look now at regulation. So looking at some of the agencies here in Washington that have oversight over cosmetics. We talked obviously about the FDA. That's the one that was most directly impacted by the new law that was passed. They also oversee something called the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act, which requires to have required information to be shared on their labels. But they just don't have a lot of money to oversee this, to be perfectly honest. The FDA's budget gets slashed every year. There are more maybe sort of high profile issues that get the attention from the FDA. And unfortunately, the cosmetics oversight is one that often falls by the wayside. The EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, also is engaged in this space. They do risk assessments of chemicals. But again, where are they on this? What have they done recently in looking at chemicals that are in cosmetics? I get it, there's a lot on the EPA's plate, but I think this is an area that needs and deserves more attention from the agency. And then finally, the FTC. I'm going to focus on the FTC for a couple of minutes here. Let me see if I can. There we go. Okay. So the FTC is the Federal Trade Commission, and they are an agency that is empowered to protect consumers. Basically, that is their whole mission. And they do that by preventing unfair business practices. There are 4 commissioners and 1 chair who are appointed by the Senate, appointed by the president, excuse me, and confirmed by the Senate. So it's somewhat of a political agency. The split is based on who's in control of the administration. So right now there are more Democrats than Republicans at that agency. One of the issues that the FTC is involved in is promulgation of what's called the Green Guides. And the Green Guides are rules that are out there to assist businesses in making lawful environmental marketing claims and helping the public in understanding and appreciating what these statements mean. So basically, if you're going to market your product as eco-friendly or green or recyclable or any number of other things, you have to be able to substantiate what these claims are. Now, the FTC isn't saying you have to make an environmentally friendly product. You can make something that's full of chemicals and horrible for everybody, but you just can't say that you're making something good. So there's a move right now to update the Green Guides. They were first promulgated in 1992, and they've been updated several times since then, but the most recent one was in 2012. And obviously there's been a lot of technological changes and developments in that time, and a lot has changed in consumer attitudes and interest in learning about marketing of products. Now you see this a lot in the fashion space. It's referred to as greenwashing when you're talking about the items of clothing. How sustainable are they? How eco-friendly are they? But this is also really important for the beauty industry as well, because think about how many times you see the word clean, natural, organic on the label of a product that you use. And it's just getting more and more so. I mean, I see products, from very inexpensive to very high-end makeup products that are all trying to capitalize on this clean, natural movement. The problem is these terms are not defined. So what does it really mean when you say that your product is clean or natural or organic? So what the FTC may look at is, if you're going to use these terms, what do consumers think? Because the guides are supposed to be a useful tool for the average consumer shopping, right? So not for the scientists necessarily who are on this call, but for your average consumer who goes in there and you see this and you're like, what does this really mean? What am I putting on my body? Right now, these terms, like I said, are not defined, and they're not even in the current issue of the Green Guides. So one of the things we should be looking at is, when the FTC updates the Green Guides, which they're in the process of doing now, are they going to take a look at these terms? Will they find that they have enough information to start to examine what the rules should be? I'll just touch briefly on this, what federal rulemaking is, because I'm talking about the Green Guides being updated. It's different than legislation. Congress isn't involved really in this. This is the agency. They go through a very rigorous structured process of publishing notice about a rule change, asking the public to submit comments, reevaluating these comments, and the results of the process does have the effect of federal law. The comment period is a really interesting opportunity to engage, because you go to regulations.gov, which will be on the next slide coming up. It's a way to share your input directly with the agency. The agency is required by law to read all the comments that come in. And regulations, other than legislation, have a defined time period. Like, we know the regulation, the comment period is open for X amount of time. They're going to read the comments and they're going to issue a final rule in X amount of time, as opposed to legislation where, a bill gets introduced. Maybe it's going to happen this year. Maybe it'll be 90 years before they get to something. This is a very discrete time period for action. And I think it's an exciting opportunity for people to really directly engage on public policy development. So what can you do? If you are interested in commenting on something like the green guides, you go to regulations.gov and you can see all the different areas where you can give your input on the green guides, on various other pending rules that are out there. And it's as simple as just filling your name in and writing your comments. And comments vary from, I've seen like one sentence for the green guides, like, I don't like greenwashing, it should be banned, to, 50-page document, footnoted, and it looks more like a legal brief. Any and everything is acceptable. You can share your information, share your views on these regulations and what you think are important. But you can also and should be engaging on the legislative side as well. Write to your representative, whether it be your congressperson, your state representative, or your local city council person. A lot of these initiatives are really started at the grassroots micro level. Sometimes it's a little easier to engage with a city council person because she or he is probably just down the street with their office, and you can go in, you can meet them, you can write to them. Let them know what's important to you as a consumer. Let them know what's important to you if you're a business owner. If you are making products yourself, talk about what the impact of legislation and regulation means to your business. And just some general tips on this kind of engagement. Read up on the issues, make sure you know what's out there, be able to share where your passions are, what you think is important. Try to develop a clear and concise ask. Sometimes you just need to go in there and be like, this is a real problem. I don't know how to fix it. You guys deal with it. That's fine too. But sometimes you can have a really discrete idea and say, yes, X is the problem, Y is the solution. Find allies and build coalitions. Look for other people who are similarly situated, who care about these issues, whether it be through organizations, through social media, however it is. It really helps to amplify your message. Every voice and every vote counts, but it's really cool if you can come together with other people and really show the groundswell of support for an issue that you care about. And finally, forge these relationships early. I always advise folks, if possible, get to know your representatives before there's a crisis. Let them know what your business is. Let them know what you care about as a consumer, so that you are there and have that kind of connection when the issue or the opportunity arises for there to be legislation or regulation. You can go in there and take it to the next step. So I kind of covered a lot of ground in a little bit of time there, but I'm going to stop there and I look forward to questions later.
Thank you so much to both our presenters. And so now, if you have any questions, we welcome the audience to ask questions that pertain to either Dr. Lariah Edwards's discussion or Hillary's presentation. So you can feel free to put them in the Q&A, or you can raise your hand. No one has questions? Well, I'll kick it off. So we're talking about regulatory, and I don't think many people know some of the, I guess, constraints of the Food and Drug Administration and how they provide protection, but very little. And you touched on the importance of MOCRA. So maybe we can expound on how why MOCRA, kind of reiterate and emphasize why MOCRA is so important to consumers, since the Food and Drug Administration has a very small enforcement on toxins in cosmetics.
I think now one of the reasons it's so important is it's the only game in town. It's the only regulatory regime out there. I think there's an argument that could be made that we need some others, but right now this is all we've got. So we want to make sure that it is enforced, that it's executed properly, that there is education around it so that both, I think, businesses know how to comply as well as individuals, so they know what to look for in their products. It was only enacted right before New Year's, so it's only been on the books for a little while, but let's make sure that this works, because this is all we've got right now.
And we have a question from an audience member. What books do you recommend to learn about the dangers of the chemicals in beauty products?
Unfortunately, I don't know of any books. What I do think is a great reference, Campaign for Safe Cosmetics by the Breast Cancer Prevention Partners. I'll put the link in the chat. They do a good job explaining different chemicals you may find across all types of personal care products, more than just the skin lighteners and chemical straighteners that I talked about. So I'll put that link in the chat. They also have a new product database of Black-owned cosmetic and personal care products that have been vetted by scientists like myself, not basically like with the same training that I have, and that have been deemed to be safer. So I'll put that in the chat, but I don't know of any books, unfortunately.
I do want to add one book, Silent Springs. I was looking up at it in my apartment. It is made by, I don't know who, I can't see the author from here, but it's a book that in general talks about toxins in the environment, and it's very enlightening. So
Also,
Sophia. Oh.
I was going to say, there's, if you look at the actual bills that have passed in Congress and in New York State, there are reports that go along with the bills, and often they have their findings in there, and it'll tell you statistical information about products and why the bill is necessary. I find that usually pretty helpful.
Sophia?
Yeah, Hillary, I was wondering, and so the EU tends to have much more stricter regulations on chemicals and consumer protection, consumer products, and it's a market that's bigger or comparable, at least to the US. Why do you think that stricter regulation there with the same companies, L'Oreal, et cetera, who are selling in those markets, hasn't spilled over into the US?
This is just my thoughts on this, but I think that it's a cultural difference between the US and the EU and even the UK on sort of the importance of regulation. I think they are more comfortable with a larger government presence in business operations than we have historically been here in the US. And you see that in the EU with their regulations, not just in cosmetics, but also in fashion, in terms of what you can do about sustainability, what your products are, the labor. They have a lot more labor protections. But yeah, it's just a different mindset about the role of government and regulation in industry.
I was just the cultural difference, I understand. It often never makes sense to me why they're producing two sort of different products. If you're having to comply with regulation in one massive market, why you just can't bring over that similar regulation to your products in the US market?
Yeah, I don't know the answer of why they do it. I mean, perhaps it's the cost, but yeah, I don't know why. Because usually, I mean, a lot of times you see in the United States, when California takes the lead in regulation, sort of it default becomes a national standard, because companies, regardless of the industry, don't want to have one standard for California and one standard for everybody else. It's easier just to have one standard across the country.
So thank you. We are just at our question and answer point. So now I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Sophia Huda, who is a toxic consultant and has been heading our Beauty Inside Out campaign at WE ACT. And so Beauty Inside Out is a campaign that shines light on the toxicity of beauty products that are marketed to people of color and that perpetuate a racially biased standard of beauty. And she will be taking us on to our panelist. So without further ado, Sophia, take it away.
Thanks, Yua. So first of all, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Today we have a great group. First up, we have Colleen Campbell. Colleen is an acting assistant professor of lawyering at NYU School of Law. Her research employs critical and interdisciplinary approaches to public health law, regulatory law, and reproductive justice. She's currently looking at obstetric violence, obstetric racism, and informed consent in reproductive care. And she's also examining the disparate impact of food and drug law on women of color through the inadequate regulation of cosmetic skin lightening products. So right up our alley for the Beauty Inside Out campaign. Next up, we have Dr. Nicole Acevedo. Dr. Acevedo is a reproductive and environmental health scientist with over 20 years of expertise in understanding the human health risks of everyday exposure to harmful chemicals, and has over 8 years of experience integrating actionable sustainability strategies into business practices for members of the personal care industry. In 2015, she became the principal scientist for Beauty Counter, which is a pioneering clean beauty brand. And in 2017, Dr. Acevedo founded Elavo Mundi Solutions, a scientific consultancy that provides cosmetic brands and retailers clear strategies to minimize risks and maximize innovation. She also proudly serves on the board of national nonprofit organizations dedicated to science-based education, acceleration of safer chemical innovation and implementation, consumer empowerment, and policy advocacy. And finally, we have Shiloh Wilkinson. Shiloh is a fashion model turned herbalist and clean beauty enthusiast. She's the founder of Okoi Apothecary, which represents self-care practices, holistic wellness, and a minimalist lifestyle. So welcome to our panelists. And let's start out with our first question. So this is a question for everyone. In your view, what do you think is the most pressing issue that needs to be addressed in terms of ensuring that we have less toxics on the market in cosmetics, personal care products, and our fashion?
Should I
Go ahead.
take that? I mean, I don't know if I have the answer, but I think that Hillary pointed out earlier the lack of any BIPOC or women of color, people of color focus in the recent law that was passed. And I think that, you know, historically, women of color fall through the gap, so to speak, in terms of regulatory law. And, you know, the lack of regulation of cosmetics has had the most disparate impact on women of color because of the history of racial targeting by the cosmetic industries with these products. And so there has to be definitely this centralization of women of color and their health in cosmetic law and regulation. And there's actually in the works or in the pipeline an act from 2021 that does that exactly, but it wasn't passed. But this law is the Cosmetic Safety for Communities of Color and Professional Salon Workers Act, and it actually mandates research on health disparities that are connected to cosmetics that are targeting communities of color. And so it's cognizant of the fact of these health disparities that Dr. Edwards was talking about in terms of uterine cancer and fibroids and all of those. And it actually requires the inclusion of people of color within these advisory committees that are looking at like cosmetic ingredient review. And so I think that something like that to supplement what's happening in terms of the other regulations is absolutely necessary.
Well, as a follow-up to that, Nicole, I was wondering if you could explain how toxins affect the body, and especially why there might be a disparate impact for women of color, people of color.
Well, that's a very complicated question with a very complicated answer. And when we're talking about the harm in chemicals, chemicals can harm us in many different ways. So they can be carcinogens, they can be reproductive toxicants, they can be dermal sensitizers, which can lead to other issues which affect our immune systems. They can be endocrine disruptors, they can be, developmental toxicants. There's so many ways that chemicals interface with our bodies. And the biggest problem we have is we don't really know all the effects. We don't know all the toxicological effects. That's just across the board for chemicals at large. And then we also don't, as has already been presented, we don't have the right regulatory levers to really address how to remove the big, most egregious chemicals from the marketplace to begin with. So that's at large. So when we narrow focus even just down to the cosmetic industry, for example, we're dealing with a highly unregulated industry. MOCRA does implement some very necessary baseline strategies that are going to hopefully be more health protective, but it's not enough. It doesn't address the bigger chemical questions that we've already overly studied and some states have already regulated. And it certainly doesn't begin to touch the health inequities that are present in our BIPOC communities. So I think that we can't have a conversation that doesn't keep focusing on the need for regulatory action. But I think that the other thing that we really just need to be very aware of is that we live in a world of chemical exposures. So this is about additive exposures. This isn't about one product that's going to have one negative effect on our health. The reason I believe in the research I've done myself and in the research of many, many colleagues in this space is, there's a kind of this additive effect, cumulative exposures that really kind of predispose certain communities to higher risks over lifetime exposures. So that's really, really important. I mean, I can always get into details about ingredient categories or chemical categories, but I think that's really the big thing is that we can't address these issues until we look at the systemic exposures and all of the things that come into play, like what Dr. Edwards really brought into focus around the perception of beauty. That might seem like a light topic, but it's actually so integral in how devastating the effects have been because of the way that certain communities within our larger societal context use products and have honed in on really harmful products. So, we have to embrace the complexity when we're looking at how to address these issues. But regulation and cumulative exposure is really, really big.
Okay. Hillary, in her presentation, discussed some challenges in better regulation. For example, as Jennifer Ortega from EDF pointed out, that the FDA's budget gets cut, and these are some hurdles to getting better regulation. Also implementing them and monitoring them. For example, she asked if we should be worried that MOCRA won't be well implemented. So how do you think we can get over these roadblocks in the institutions that are not being able to provide us good regulation? How do we get around that? Tough question, I know.
Hillary, can you hear us? I think you're having a little bit of tech issue.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize that was solely directed at me.
No, it was directed at everyone, if anyone else had any ideas.
So the question is how to get around the inadequate funding to address what really needs to be addressed in cosmetics regulation. Because I do think that one thing that's salient about MOCRA is that there wasn't any provision for user fees. And this is an important way for the FDA to supplement whatever funding it gets through Congress. And that's the reason why drug regulation is probably more robust than cosmetics, and other like medical devices is because of these supplementary funds. And so I don't really have a solution about getting around that, because I do think that, you know, I agree that it's really the only thing that we have, but it's very, as far as I'm concerned, I'm definitely concerned about the enforcement going forward because of some of these issues. And there's, you know, definitely I could talk about litigation by community organizations in terms of, you know, under the Administrative Procedures Act to try to compel agencies to actually do what they're mandated to do, or if there's an obligation to act. But those are discrete litigation actions that can, you know, come about in terms of making sure, for example, it's under a mandate now to actually develop standards for asbestos, right? After years of neglect and what happened with Johnson & Johnson, and probably, you know, it's kind of too little too late, but it is under a mandate. And I think that we have to make sure that whatever standard it develops isn't going to just be permissive to the industry and allow all of these egregious cases of, like, you know, what we're dealing with ovarian cancer and mesothelioma and so forth. So there are things that we can do in terms of the legal aspect, but I'll defer to others in terms of addressing it from other angles.
I'll just
One
add
thing
that. No, go ahead, Hillary.
just, consumer attention to the issue can really drive some change here. And some of the nexus done with the congressionals is that, the FDA has to come before Congress every year, at least once a year, to plead their case for funding. That's an opportunity for members of Congress to ask them questions. And if you, ideally, you'd have a member of Congress ask the FDA, why aren't you doing more on this? Or what does it take for you to do this? And get them on the record for answering what the status is and what they are doing there. And that's where it comes in. If you have a good relationship with a member of Congress, you need someone who sits on that committee, whether it be the Appropriations Committee or an Oversight Committee, who can ask that question, but to sort of elevate it in that space. It's a long road. It's not a quick fix, but it is a way to sort of keep the attention on the issue.
And I just wanted to add, just once again, really pushing for stronger regulatory action. And I think a lot of the groundwork has already been done. States have been pushing really hard here in the US and implemented stronger, safety standards for products there. I think we just have to keep pushing on the federal regulatory levers, because the minute that you get we're just asking for a baseline, like 11 chemicals that are already known to be harmful. You cannot, you can't sugarcoat any of the ones that were already put in the provision for the Toxic Beauty Act. Get those on the table, because that sets a baseline. That sets a standard for, we're going to start to actually take action. And, once it's, that we live in a litigation-based society here in the US. So the minute you put something on the table as prohibited, then, it's not, I don't think it's a great system, but, we have a litigation-based system here in the US where you can, companies will be held liable if they try to go around the issues or, not try to deal with the big picture item. So I think that there's a lot of things we can do as consumers. There's a lot we can continue to do as advocates in this space, but it takes pushing on all fronts, and that includes the business space, and just really making sure that we get something meaningful on the books at the federal regulatory level in the next couple of years, hopefully.
All right.
Yeah, piggybacking off of Nicole, I'm speaking from someone who is frontline in the fashion and beauty industry. And I think the major problem, or the biggest problem for me, is the advertising, because that's something that I'm a part of. Modeling for over 20 years, I can't tell you how many times I've been told to pretty much just lie about what's in a product just to sell a product. And that's the issue for me. Is that's probably why I transitioned out of the fashion world, is because I didn't believe in some of the things, well, most of the things that they're telling me or pretty much paying me to say that is safe, that I know that's not safe. There's so many incidents where it's like, I don't want to continue to market to people who look like me to use chemicals on their skins that I know that is toxic. So I'm so happy to be a part of a community, or pretty much an army of women who is trying to regulate this huge topic that's, I know for sure, 100% seen how damaging it could be just being on set. Like, it's amazing. So I'm just happy to be here and happy to be a part of it, be at the table talking about it. So I'm here to learn and share. So that's where I'm at with this.
That's great. I was actually going to ask you, Shiloh, Hillary brought up the issue of, consumer engagement. And so you have a brand, and how do you instruct and demonstrate how to make toxic-free products and engage your customers in that, and what challenges you have in conveying these messages to them?
So from the beginning, like, I've been taught to sell products, whereas you have to use 16 different ingredients just to achieve one thing. And from a long history of just like understanding, like, no, we don't need X, Y, and Z just to hydrate your skin. You don't need like 15 different other products just to be able to achieve, like, white teeth or something like that. So I just took the time out just to educate myself from all the things that people have been telling me about, and try to figure out, like, how can I eliminate at least 5 different ingredients just to come up with one. So I decided to come up with a company where I was like, you just need one thing just to help. Start off with something that's more natural. And I understand that the term natural is it's in a gray area right now, but to know that you just, instead of just using something simple as like toothpaste, try baking soda. So I'm trying to educate my consumers how to eliminate and be more mindful about what they use in and on their body. So that's where Akoi Apothecary came about, because being from the island, we didn't have much access to so many different products. So we had to figure out what was the most, one product minded thing to use to be able to live a sustainable lifestyle. So that's where I want to be. I want to be an advocate to learn, to teach my consumers how to be more mindful about what they're using in and on their body.
I'm also interested in learning about your journey, starting out as a model and then now being more aware of toxic chemicals. When you started out and you were sitting there in the makeup chair, the hair styling chair, were you aware, and especially, a few years ago, things were a lot less regulated, and, were you aware of how much you were being exposed to? Did you have a say? Were you able to, advocate for yourself if you were aware, or what was your...
Modeling in this industry has been pretty challenging for a while. Starting off with big agencies, I've been told by 2 major agencies to bleach my skin because I was too dark. I've been asked by one agency to relax my hair because they didn't know how to market my natural hair too.
Look, you can name the agencies. Go ahead.
That's tough because I fight with that so many times. And whenever somebody asks me, like, well, how was your experience with this agency? And I'm like, it wasn't good. I was the rebellious one. I was the one to say, like, well, you want me to bleach my skin? I'm gonna be in the sun for another week so I could get darker. I was that type of girl to say, like, you can't tell me to alter my skin, my complexion, my hair, and fill my body with toxins, because I just know, like, these things aren't they're not supposed to be on my skin and alter the texture and the complexion of my skin. That's not natural. So I rebelled a lot. And I've been I've been booked for jobs where I'm supposed to be advertising a soap that alters the skin color of women. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm sorry, but you guys might have to drop me from this agency because I don't participate in stuff like that. And I don't want to sell it to consumers who look like me. So my journey in this industry, and especially in beauty and fashion, has been super challenging. And I've had so many incidents on set where I was told to leave because I said, no, I'm not having somebody chemically touch up the edges of my hair just so whomever is fixing my hair finds it easier. Or I was told that maybe getting a jerry curl would have been easier for my hair to be manipulated for the stylist. Or the makeup artist couldn't find my skin color, my skin shade, so therefore maybe just lighten it up, tune it up a little bit. I'm like, no, if you guys can't accept me for me, this is how I'm going to sell to my consumers or my audience. I want people who are looking at me to say, like, this is a woman who decided not to alter her skin color or her hair texture. This is the product that you should or maybe want to consider, but not the other way around. So this journey in fashion and in beauty pretty much just pushed me further away to start something that's more sustainable, more healthy is the word that I want to use. Healthy, a healthy way of nurturing your skin, nurturing your inner wellness and stuff. So I'm happy to say that I've drifted far out of the beauty industry, but I kind of want to stay in and teach my consumers how to do it the better way than what I've been hired to do in the past. So it's still going on. I'm still hearing from other models who are probably still in their teens being asked to bleach their knees because they want the agency wants their knees and their elbows to be the same shade as the rest of their bodies. And I'm like, sis, don't do it. It's not worth it, because that little job that you're booking for one day may alter your whole body and cause more harm to you in your lifetime. So I just want to be able to like share that with people who look like me and so forth.
I want to point out that that's a very important, I guess, things we don't really touch on. I don't know, recently, past Fashion Week, I don't know what city, like where it was, Milan or Paris or New York, but one model who was not even dark, actually, I mean, at all, was very, she was in tears, and she filmed it for TikTok about how she was treated backstage by the makeup artists who just did not know how to deal with her hair, her skin. So she just did it herself. And that's something that we really, don't touch on as much in the industry, about how there's just there's only like maybe 3 or 4 makeup artists, Pat McGrath, that we know of. And the rest are just, it doesn't seem like they want to learn, because I don't think I think skin is skin. So if you know how to put makeup on, you should know how to put it on. The colors and match the shade to any type of skin. So yeah. Thank you for sharing.
It sucks that they don't want to learn, and therefore agencies are telling girls like, well, since the artists don't want to learn, maybe you should catch up to the artist by altering your appearance so that they could do their job. And I'm like, that's not it. They need to learn how to do their job and learn how to put makeup on this skin color or darker or even lighter skin color as well. So yeah, I've been in those chairs where I've cried. I've been in those chairs where I wanted to fight. I've been in those chairs where I was like, I'm calling my agency. It's like, if you guys don't get me out of here or get this makeup artist off of me, because she's applying stuff that is burning my skin. I've been on jobs where I was like, I literally seen my skin burn from the stuff that they put on my skin. I've had my hair fall out on set because some of the stuff that they put on my hair say like, oh, it's natural, it's just to make sure it holds your hair back. Pull the ponytail holder out, my hair is in my lap or in my hand. So yeah, it's it's amazing how they're not trying to learn how to use things that are more healthy for us. And I want to change that as much as I can.
Yeah. Yeah, it's shocking to me still in 2023 that you have so-called professionals who still don't know how to do makeup for a range of skin tones. I mean, it's basic color theory, right? It's not rocket science, or to treat how to style all types of hair either. I mean, that's your job, that's your career path. You should be able to know how to do it, right? But thank you for sharing that experience. It was very interesting to hear. Unfortunate, but interesting to hear. My last question for Colleen and Nicole is, this is an area especially of interest to me, is how, in your experience, how have you seen, or how have you understood industry to be able to manipulate science? And what I mean by that is to, in terms of testing, how they test, methodology for testing products or chemicals and demonstrating their safety, and doing that to their advantage. Have you seen examples in your, yeah.
I'll talk about it briefly because I think Nicole might be more of an expert on this. So I'll just give the brief example of that's coming from what I'm learning about. So I mentioned the asbestos issue earlier, and so I think it's interesting that the agency, or the FDA, is finally going to address it. And I think when you read the litigation that's ongoing with Johnson & Johnson, this case called Ingham v. Johnson & Johnson, and a lot of discussion is coming out about what it's almost like conspiratorial, the way that this company manipulated the regulatory process in terms of the actual standards that were eventually adopted. And so they basically, there were two different standards for measuring asbestos. One was more sensitive and accurate, one was not as sensitive. And the one that they pressured or aggressively lobbied the agency to adopt invariably resulted in missing a lot of cases of asbestos, because it could only detect it if it was, for example, at 12 parts per milligram versus if it was 5 parts per milligram. And so they were, very, they did that expertly, and I talked about the result of that. And so I think that I haven't studied in other contexts, but I'm sure that it exists. And so I'll pass the baton to Nicole to talk about her expertise.
Thank you, Colleen. That was actually a great setup for, I guess one of the biggest considerations is, which is an inconvenient truth, is that our regulatory science across the board, even internationally, really wasn't set up. The assays weren't set up to understand low dose exposures, everyday, non-linear exposures. And I don't want to get too scientific with the terminology, but there's been this understanding that there's only one way to assess safety. It's basically like the dose makes the poison. It's this linear model, right? Like there's a dose that'll kill you, there's a dose that's probably safe. And this is like what's been considered across the board, independent of what the endpoint is, whether it's, looking at cancer endpoints or looking at dermal sensitization. And in the field that I worked in for a long time, which was hormone disruption research, it kind of took this whole concept and like turned it on its head, because what it's showing is that normally in our normal body systems work because of hormones, right? We cannot function without them. And the way that hormones work is they're exquisitely sensitive at very, very low doses in our body. If you overload a system with hormones, you're gonna maybe not get a big effect or whatnot. So this research, which is only about 30 something years old at this point, has taken the whole like safety model and turned it on its head, because it's making us question how we think about our everyday exposures to chemicals and what the safety profiles can be. So thankfully, regulatory bodies in the EU are really starting to consider these low dose models, these different models of exposure. And we need to have that same methodology kind of accepted across the board internationally and then looked at here in the US. So to me, that's been one of the biggest hurdles in talking about the science, is that we have to accept that science evolves. You know, a lot of people want to think science is very static, and it is not. Our understanding of it evolves as the science evolves. And so we need to appreciate what the science is telling us if we really listen to it. And when we're talking about, you know, everyday exposures to chemicals, this, you know, most of the time we're talking about low dose exposures and additive exposures and exposures at critical windows of development, which is a whole other topic, right? Which actually Dr. Edwards did note a little bit about, like, you know, if you're, you know, during breastfeeding or pregnancy, puberty, you know, there's some certain windows that we as individuals are more prone to having an effect of that chemical exposure result in potentially really long-term adverse health outcomes. So there's just a lot going on, and our just to really round it out, you know, our regulatory based science really just needs to catch up and pay attention and do better, so that it will also trickle down and kind of into how industry scientists are really looking at this, because the academic scientists have already been doing this work. We need to really integrate all the different scientific spaces and have some humility in the process about what we know and what we don't know, and grow with that.
Can I add something, Sophia? I think that type of analysis is exactly what's going to be necessary. And you know, one of the things that stood out to me about MOCRA is, and I don't mean to just be bashing it, but you know, the adverse events that it requires to be reported have to be serious adverse events, right? So it's not looking at long-term cumulative health effects, right? It's something where, you know, if there's, like, for example, inpatient hospitalization, so some acute adverse reaction that's like, you know, disfigurement or life-threatening. And so it's not really attuned to how it is that cosmetic harm actually occurs on a commonplace basis, right? The fact that I used hair straightening chemicals for, you know, 10 years of my life as a youth probably predisposed me to uterine fibroids later on and all of these stuff. That's not going to be caught up in this net of cosmetic reform. And so I think that you're, you know, hitting on the button, so to speak, that there has to be an understanding about how cosmetic harms the body, that it's not going to be these, right, very severe discrete incidents that it's designed to address.
Very interesting, thank you. So we're nearing our end, but we just have some time for some questions, if there's any questions from the audience for our panelists. And that can include Hillary and Mariah, if you have any questions for them. No? Are you sure? The last chance? No? Going? All right. Well, that's great. That means that we end right on time. So I'll pass it over to Yua to close the session for us.
Thank you so much. And if you do have a question, maybe you forgot, feel free to email. Our emails at WEACT are, you know, our first names at weact.com. So it's not hard to find us. And we can also pass it along to our panelists and our presenters. Also, I do want to give a plug for our Beauty Inside Out working group. If you are interested in joining our Beauty Inside Out working group, they meet on the third Wednesday of each month from 6:30 to 7:30 via Zoom. And it is free to attend. And basically, we talk about the same things that we're talking about now. So, but in more robust and smaller forms, and that is through our WEACT's Department of Environmental Health. And our new director, Michaela, is on the call. And so we hope that everybody can really get involved and advocate. And we are so excited to have such a robust discussion today. I thank you all for having your time. I will all follow up with each one of you to provide more logistics after. And also this is going to be recorded and it will be most likely on our YouTube, WeX YouTube channel, so that everybody who couldn't be here can actually watch. So again, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Have a lovely day. And again, thank you. Goodbye.
Oh, just one last thing.
Okay.
I just put in the chat the link to our Google Doc that shows the schedule for the Beauty Inside Out working group, and also the Zoom link is in there. So you can bookmark that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon. May I stop recording?